Sheriff stops female black judge at traffic for driving a luxury car. The late October sun was a blistering brand across the Texas Panhandle, baking the asphalt of County Road 17 until it shimmered with mirages. The kind of heat that made the air taste like dust and rust. Judge Annalise Harding felt it radiating through the floorboards of her black Mercedes-Maybach GLS, a vehicle as quiet and insulated as the 394th District Court she presided over in Houston. She was 5 hours from home, her briefcase filled with real estate filings, and her mind occupied with a complex estate dispute. She'd been driving for 3 hours straight, and the monotonous rhythm of the highway had lulled her into a rare moment of private thought. She was thinking about her grandmother, the one who'd cleaned houses in Lubbock for 50 years, the one who'd saved every nickel to buy a dusty, dented Ford Pinto. Her grandmother had always said, "Baby, the only thing more dangerous than a white man with a badge is a white man with a badge who's been made to feel small." The thought was still lingering when the flashing blue and red lights ripped through her rearview mirror. Annalise sighed, a deep, weary sound. She checked her speed. 55 and a 65. Her tags were current, her license valid. She did as she was always taught, turned on her interior light, placed her hands on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, and waited. Her window was already down, letting in the scorching air. The man who approached was Sheriff Royce T. Gable. He was a broad, thick-necked man in his late 50s, his khaki uniform straining at the belly. His mirrored aviators reflected her car back at her. "License and registration," he said. It wasn't a request. "Of course, Sheriff," Annalise said, her voice calm and even, the same voice she used to quiet a chaotic courtroom. "May I ask why you pulled me over?" Rolling through the stop sign back at the intersection with Old Mill Road. Annalise's brow furrowed. "Sheriff, I haven't passed an intersection in 12 miles. The last one was a four-way stop, and I came to a complete stop." "I'm sure of it." Sheriff Gable's jaw tightened. He leaned down slightly, his gaze sweeping over the interior of the car, the polished wood trim, the soft Napa leather, the shimmering Bang & Olufsen speaker grills. His eyes, when they finally met hers, held a look she knew intimately. It was a look she'd seen on the faces of opposing counsel who underestimated her, on the faces of defendants who thought a black woman on the bench was a soft touch. It was a look of pure, unadulterated disdain. "I said you ran it," he stated flatly. "And you got them fancy Texas plates with the numbers all crunched together. Makes them hard to read. That's a separate violation. Obstructed identification." Annalise felt a cold knot form in her stomach. Obstructed? They're standard-issued specialty plates. They're perfectly legal. "In my county, we have a standard," he said, his voice dripping with a smug authority. "That car's too dark, too. Tinted windows. That's another violation. Sheriff, this is an SUV. The factory tint on the rear passenger windows is legal in all 50 states, and the front windows are rolled down." He ignored her. "License and registration. Now. Or we can add failure to comply to the list." Annalise took a slow, deliberate breath. Her grandmother's voice echoed again, a white man with a badge who's been made to feel small. She was driving a car that cost more than his annual salary. In his mind, she had made him feel small simply by existing behind its wheel. She slowly reached for her glove compartment, pulled out the registration, and handed it over with her license. He snatched them from her hand and walked back to his patrol car. For 45 minutes, Annalise Harding sat in her Maybach on the shoulder of County Road 17. The air from the window was now furnace hot. Cars and pickups whipped past, their occupants staring. She watched in her side mirror as Sheriff Gable sat in his air-conditioned cruiser, talking on his radio, occasionally looking down at her documents. He was making a show of it. He was making her wait. When he finally ambled back, he didn't hand her the documents. Instead, he held up a thick citation booklet. "Got you for the stop sign. Got you for the obstructed plates. And I'm writing you up for the tint," he announced, scribbling with a flourish. "I could take you in for the tint, you know. It's a safety hazard for my deputies." Annalise looked at the ticket he thrust through the window. The total estimated fine was nearly $1,500. For a phantom stop sign, a legal license plate, and a window tint law he was clearly misinterpreting. Her signature line awaited her. "I'm not signing that," she said quietly. His face reddened. "You'll sign it or you'll spend the night in my jail until the judge can see you in the morning." She met his gaze, her dark eyes unwavering. "I'll take the jail cell, Sheriff. But I think you should know something before you make that decision." He scoffed. "And what's that? You gonna call your lawyer? Call your husband?" "No," she said, her voice carrying the weight of gavels and oaths. "I'm not going to call anyone. Because in about 10 minutes, the Texas Department of Public Safety is going to call you. And then the county judge is going to call you. And then, Sheriff, you're going to realize that the person you just threatened to lock up for having a fancy car is the same person who, 3 weeks ago, signed the order allowing your department to finally get that new grant for body cameras you've been begging for. I am Judge Annalise Harding, of the 394th District Court. And you have just created a discovery document for a civil rights lawsuit that is going to bleed this county dry." The color didn't just drain from Sheriff Gable's face, it vanished, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask. The citation booklet trembled in his hand. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out, just a dry click of his tongue. For the first time, he truly saw her, not the driver of a luxury car, but the woman who held the power to make his professional life a living hell. And he knew, with a chilling certainty, that he had just made the biggest mistake of his career. The next 48 hours in Hemlock County were a masterclass in chaos theory, proving that one man's arrogance could unravel an entire fiefdom. Sheriff Gable did not, in fact, let Judge Harding go. His pride, already battered by her revelation, would not allow for a public retreat in front of one of his deputies, who had pulled up moments after her declaration to see what was taking so long. Instead, he doubled down. "I don't care if you're the Queen of Sheba," he sputtered, his face a mottled patchwork of fury and fear. "You're under arrest for obstruction and resisting arrest." It was a lie, and a clumsy one. Annalise hadn't resisted. She had simply sat there, a portrait of judicial poise, as he yanked open her door and roughly pulled her out. The deputy, a young man named Billy Tatum, looked like he wanted to sink into the asphalt. He knew. Everyone within earshot of the digital police band would soon know. The booking process at the Hemlock County Detention Center was a surreal affair. Annalise was processed, fingerprinted, and had her mugshot taken. She was allowed one phone call. She used it to call her clerk in Houston, a sharp young woman named Elena, who had strict, written instructions for exactly this kind of situation. "Elena," Annalise said, her voice calm despite the orange jumpsuit they'd forced her into. "Remember the Sheriff Gable file." Elena, sipping her coffee in the air-conditioned 394th District Court, nearly choked. "Oh, my God. He actually did it. The man in the panhandle? The one from the news articles about the racial profiling complaints? That's the one. Call the DPS first. Then call the Houston office of the Texas Tribune. Then call my attorney, Vernon Sachs. Tell him to bring a moving truck for the documents." Within an hour, the first domino fell. The Texas Department of Public Safety, upon receiving a call from a district judge's chambers regarding an unlawful detention and potential civil rights violations, activated a protocol that landed on the desk of their regional commander. He, in turn, made a call to the Hemlock County judge, a harried woman named Lillian Crockett who had been trying to fire Royce Gable for 5 years but lacked the political capital. County Judge Crockett's call to the sheriff's office was not cordial. "Royce, tell me you did not arrest a black woman from Houston for driving a nice car. Tell me that's a sick joke." Gable, in his office, leaned back in his chair, emboldened by the false courage of a man who has burned every bridge and doesn't yet smell the smoke. "Lillian, she was breaking the law. I don't care what color she is." She resisted. "She's a judge, Royce. A district judge. You're not just in trouble, you're in a black hole of trouble. Release her." Now. But by the time that call ended, the second domino had tipped. A reporter from the Texas Tribune was already on the phone with the Hemlock County dispatcher, asking for a comment on the arrest of a sitting judge for driving while black. The term hadn't been used yet, but the implication was clear. Gable, stubborn to the last, refused to release her until the next morning, citing standard procedure. He had her moved to a private cell, but the damage was irrevocable. Annalise spent the night reading a worn paperback she found on a shelf, her composure never wavering, which infuriated the jailers more than any outburst could have. When she was finally released at 9 a.m. the next day, it was not into the parking lot, but into a maelstrom. Vernon Sachs, her attorney, was waiting, a man in a $3,000 suit holding a leather briefcase in a linoleum-tiled lobby. With him was a woman from the regional ACLU, and 2 reporters. Annalise, still in the wrinkled clothes from the day before, walked past Sheriff Gable, who was lurking near the exit, looking as if he hadn't slept. She didn't acknowledge him. "Judge Harding," one reporter called out. "What are your next steps?" She paused, turning to face them. Her eyes, tired but sharp, flickered briefly to Gable. "My next steps," she said, her voice clear and steady, "are to go home, shower, and get back to my docket. My lawyer will handle the rest." The rest was a legal atom bomb. Vernon Sachs, a legendary civil rights litigator who had made his name taking on small-town tyrannies, filed a federal lawsuit in the Northern District of Texas by noon. It was a masterpiece of legal precision. The plaintiff, Annalise Harding. The defendant, Sheriff Royce T. Gable, in his individual and official capacities, and Hemlock County. The claims were a laundry list of constitutional violations: unlawful seizure, 4th Amendment. Equal protection violation based on race, 14th Amendment. Malicious prosecution. False imprisonment. The lawsuit wasn't just for the traffic stop, it was for the arrest, the overnight detention, the humiliation, and the clear pattern of racial profiling that Gable's department had exhibited for years. And then came the kicker. Vernon had anticipated Gable's defense, that he was merely enforcing the law. To preempt this, Vernon's team had already obtained, via a public records request filed the moment Elena made the call, the dashcam footage from Deputy Tatum's car. The audio was pristine. It captured Gable pulling Annalise over. It captured his aggressive tone. And it captured the moment after Annalise identified herself. The footage showed Gable walking back to his car, getting on the radio, and saying to the dispatcher, "Got me some uppity Houston Negro judge in a fancy car. Thinks she's better than everyone. I'm gonna teach her a lesson." The audio was time-stamped. It was recorded before he returned to her car and claimed she had resisted arrest. It was the smoking gun. It proved the arrest was not about a traffic violation. It was about a lesson. It was about a luxury car. It was about race. When Vernon Sachs played that audio clip for the first time in Judge Crockett's office, with the county's insurance lawyers on speakerphone, a profound silence filled the room. The insurance lawyer, a man from a large firm in Dallas, spoke first. "Miss Crockett," he said, his voice grave. "You need to understand something. With this evidence, we are not going to trial. We are going to lose. Badly. The only question is how much this is going to cost the county. We need to talk about a settlement, and we need to talk about it now. Because every day we wait, that number gets bigger." Judge Crockett looked at the phone, then at Vernon Sachs, who simply smiled a thin, predatory smile. "My client," Vernon said, "is willing to listen. But she's not willing to forget." The settlement negotiations lasted exactly 47 minutes. Hemlock County's insurance carrier, a regional outfit called Lone Star Mutual that wasn't used to handling 7-figure exposure, sent a young, sharp-suited attorney named Bradley Keene. He arrived with spreadsheets and actuarial tables, ready to haggle. He left with a hollow look in his eyes and a profound respect for Vernon Sachs. Vernon hadn't brought spreadsheets. He brought a large cardboard box. When Bradley Keene began his opening statement about shared culpability and mitigating circumstances, Vernon simply lifted the lid of the box and began placing items on the conference table, one by one. Item 1, a printout of the dashcam audio transcript, with Sheriff Gable's uppity Houston Negro quote highlighted in neon yellow. Item 2, a binder containing the personnel files of 3 former Hemlock County deputies who had filed complaints about Gable's racial profiling, all of whom had been forced out within 6 months. Item 3, a flash drive with video depositions from 4 black motorists who had been pulled over by Gable in the last 3 years, given tickets for phantom violations, and never fought back. Their names and case numbers were neatly cataloged. Item 4, a financial analysis of Hemlock County's budget, showing that a jury verdict in excess of $10 million would effectively bankrupt the county, forcing the closure of the senior center, the layoff of teachers, and the defunding of the volunteer fire department. Item 5, a photograph of Annalise Harding's grandmother, standing proudly next to her dented Ford Pinto. Vernon didn't say a word during this process. He just placed each item with the care of a museum curator. When he was done, he finally spoke. Mr. Keene, my client is a reasonable woman. She doesn't want to destroy Hemlock County. She just wants justice to be served, and she wants to ensure this never happens to another person on this road. Your insured, Sheriff Gable, gave her a $1,500 ticket. We're going to give you one chance to give her something else. A number. One number. And if that number isn't on this table in the next 30 minutes, we're going to federal court, and I'm going to ask a jury for $40 million in punitive damages alone. Bradley Keene looked at the items on the table. He looked at the clock. He excused himself to make a phone call. 28 minutes later, he returned with a number. $35 million. It was, at the time, the largest pretrial settlement for a single plaintiff civil rights case in the history of the Northern District of Texas. The terms were ironclad, $25 million to Annalise Harding personally, and $10 million to be placed in a fund administered by the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to provide legal representation for traffic stop victims across the state. Sheriff Gable would be terminated immediately, with no pension, and Hemlock County would be placed under a federal consent decree mandating body cameras, de-escalation training, and independent oversight of the Sheriff's Department for the next 10 years. Annalise signed the papers in her chambers in Houston, wearing her black judicial robe. She didn't smile. She simply nodded, handed the pen back to Vernon, and said, "Now I can get back to work." But the story didn't end there. The settlement was announced on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, Sheriff Royce Gable was a pariah. His own deputies wouldn't look at him. His wife left him. The county commissioners held an emergency meeting and voted unanimously to accept his resignation, effective immediately, though the settlement required his termination anyway. He cleaned out his office in 20 minutes, stuffing 30 years of memorabilia into cardboard boxes while reporters snapped photos through the window. He retreated to a hunting cabin he owned on the edge of the county, a dilapidated structure with no cell service and a faulty propane heater. He told himself he was lying low, waiting for the storm to pass. He told himself that people would forget, that he'd find work as a security consultant somewhere, that his name would be cleared. He was wrong. The national media descended on Hemlock County like locusts. Cable news ran the dashcam audio on a loop. Late-night comedians made jokes about uppity judges and luxury car lessons. The Washington Post ran a front-page feature on Annalise Harding, tracing her journey from her grandmother's cleaning business to the bench. The Texas Tribune launched an investigation into every traffic stop Gable had made in the last decade, uncovering a pattern so blatant that even his former supporters couldn't defend him. And then, on a frigid Thursday night in late November, the propane heater in Gable's cabin malfunctioned. He was found 3 days later by a deer hunter who noticed the cabin door hanging open. The official cause of death was carbon monoxide poisoning. The unofficial consensus among the locals was that it was the kind of justice the law couldn't provide. Annalise heard the news while reviewing briefs in her chambers. She set down her pen and stared out the window at the Houston skyline for a long moment. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel satisfaction. She felt, if anything, a profound weariness. Vernon called her that evening. "You hear about Gable?" "I heard. Any comment for the record?" She was quiet for a moment. "The record," she said finally, "will show that Sheriff Royce Gable died alone, in a cold cabin, forgotten by everyone who once cheered him on. The record will also show that a black woman in a luxury car survived him. That's comment enough." The settlement money arrived in due course. Annalise donated a significant portion to legal aid societies across Texas. She quietly paid off her grandmother's old house in Lubbock, the one the family had lost years ago, and had it converted into a community center. She bought a new car, a modest hybrid sedan, and drove it without incident. She returned to Hemlock County only once, 6 months later, to speak at the dedication of the new public library, which had been partially funded by the settlement's community outreach provisions. The county judge, Lillian Crockett, greeted her warmly. The new sheriff, a woman named Maria Santos, shook her hand and thanked her for the body cameras. As Annalise drove away, back toward Houston, she passed the spot on County Road 17 where it had all begun. She slowed down, just for a moment, and looked at the shoulder where she had waited for 45 minutes in the heat. Then she pressed the accelerator and kept driving. The sun was setting over the Texas Panhandle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. It looked, she thought, almost exactly like it had that day. But everything else had changed. And somewhere in the fading light, she imagined she could hear her grandmother's voice, soft and proud, "That's my girl." The trouble with winning is that everyone wants a piece. In the year following the settlement, Judge Annalise Harding discovered that the $35 million was not the end of her ordeal. It was, in many ways, the beginning of a new and more insidious one. The first sign came in the form of a thick cream-colored envelope, delivered to her chambers by a process server who clearly enjoyed his work. It was a lawsuit. Not against her, but naming her as a third-party respondent. The plaintiffs were 3 former deputies of Sheriff Gable, including young Billy Tatum, the one who had witnessed the arrest. They were suing Hemlock County for wrongful termination, claiming they had been fired as scapegoats to appease a powerful black judge from Houston. Annalise read the complaint twice, then set it down and laughed. It was a hollow, incredulous laugh. She had never met these men. She had never requested their termination. But in the twisted logic of the post-settlement world, she was now the villain in their narrative, the outsider who had destroyed their careers. Vernon Sachs handled it, as he handled everything now. The lawsuit was dismissed with prejudice within 6 months, but not before the deputies gave interviews to a fringe website claiming that Annalise had used her connections to ruin them. The comments sections beneath those articles were a sewer of racism and conspiracy theories. She didn't read them. Elena, her clerk, did, and quietly printed out the most egregious ones for Vernon's files. Just in case. The second sign was more personal. Her son, Marcus, was a sophomore at Stanford, studying computer science. He was brilliant, funny, and fiercely protective of his mother. They spoke every Sunday without fail. But one Sunday in March, his call came earlier than usual, and his voice was tight. "Mom, someone found my address." Annalise's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "I got a package. No return address. Inside was a copy of that dashcam video, with my dorm room number written on it in marker. And a note. It said, 'Your mother thinks she's won. She hasn't.'" Annalise was on a plane to California within 4 hours. She sat in the dean's office the next morning, her voice calm but her eyes blazing, demanding security protocols, demanding protection for her son. The dean, a harried man who clearly wished this problem would simply disappear, assured her that everything possible would be done. Marcus was less concerned. "Mom, it's just some loser with a printer." "I'm not scared." "You should be," she said quietly. "Men like that, they don't need a reason. They just need a target." She hired private security for him anyway, a quiet former Secret Service agent named Diane who shadowed him from classes to the library to his part-time job at a campus coffee shop. Marcus complained, but he complied. He'd learned long ago that when his mother used that tone, argument was futile. The third sign was the most insidious of all. It came from within the judiciary. Annalise had always had colleagues who resented her rise. She was young for a district judge, black, a woman, and unapologetically competent. The settlement had made her a celebrity, and celebrity in the insular world of Texas jurisprudence was not always a blessing. At a judicial conference in Austin, she found herself cornered by a senior judge from East Texas, a silver-haired man named Clayton Beauregard who had been on the bench since before she was born. He approached her during a coffee break, his smile as thin as parchment. "Judge Harding," he said, his drawl stretching the syllables. "Quite a year you've had." "Quite a year." "Judge Beauregard," she replied evenly. "How are you?" "Doing well, doing well. Though I must say, some of my colleagues are a bit concerned about the precedent you've set." "Precedent?" He leaned in, his breath smelling of bourbon and coffee. $35 million for a traffic stop. That's a lot of zeros. Makes every other plaintiff in every other little town think they've got a lottery ticket. Makes our job a lot harder. Juries start thinking every badge is a target. Annalise held his gaze. "With respect, Judge, it wasn't a traffic stop. It was false imprisonment, racial profiling, and a deliberate abuse of power." The zeros reflected the severity of the conduct. Beauregard's smile didn't waver, but his eyes hardened. "Of course. Of course. Just something to think about. We're all on the same team, after all. The bench. The law. Wouldn't want anyone to think one of us is above the rest." He patted her arm and walked away. Annalise stood perfectly still, her coffee growing cold in her hand. She understood exactly what he was saying. He was warning her. The old guard was circling. They would never forgive her for winning so publicly, so decisively, against one of their own, even a corrupt one. That night, she called Vernon from her hotel room. "I need you to keep a file," she said. "A new one." "What kind of file?" "Call it the colleagues. I want to know everything about every judge in this state who has ever received a complaint about racial bias. Every closed-door settlement. Every quietly dismissed case. I want to know who their friends are, who their donors are, and who they've protected." Vernon was quiet for a moment. "Annalise, that's a lot of dynamite." "I know. But if they're going to come for me, I want to know exactly where they're standing when the ground starts to shake." The conference ended without further incident, but Annalise felt the shift. The invitations to speak at legal conferences dried up. The friendly nods in the hallway became more perfunctory. She was no longer just a colleague, she was a cautionary tale, a force of nature that had to be contained. And then, in April, the fourth sign arrived. It was a letter, handwritten on expensive stationery, from the governor of Texas. "Dear Judge Harding, I have followed your career with great interest. Your recent experience in Hemlock County has brought significant attention to issues of judicial conduct and civil rights. As we look toward the future of our great state, I believe it is essential that we have leaders who can bridge divides and represent the best of Texas on a national stage. I would like to invite you to dinner at the governor's mansion to discuss a potential appointment to the Texas Supreme Court. There is a vacancy expected later this year, and your name has been raised as a possible candidate. I hope you will consider this opportunity to serve at the highest level. Sincerely, Governor Marcus Allen." Annalise read the letter 3 times. The Texas Supreme Court. The highest civil court in the state. All 9 justices were Republicans. All 9 were white. She would be the first black woman, the first Democrat appointee in decades. It was a trap. It had to be. And yet. She thought of her grandmother, scrubbing floors in Lubbock. She thought of Sheriff Gable, dead in his cabin. She thought of Judge Beauregard's warning, and the deputy's lawsuit, and the note sent to her son. She picked up the phone and called Vernon. "I need you to come with me to dinner at the governor's mansion," she said. "The governor's mansion? Annalise, what did you do?" I didn't do anything. He did. He wants to make me a Supreme Court justice. Vernon was silent for a long moment. Then he said, slowly, that's either the greatest honor of your career or the most sophisticated political hit job I've ever seen. Probably both, Annalise said. Probably both. She looked out her window at the Houston skyline, glittering in the evening light. Somewhere out there, people were cheering for her. Somewhere out there, people were plotting against her. And somewhere in between, the truth of what she had become was still taking shape. She wasn't just a judge anymore. She was a symbol. And symbols, she was learning, were very dangerous things to be. The dinner at the governor's mansion was a masterclass in political theater, and Annalise Harding was the featured performer whether she liked it or not. The mansion itself was a carefully curated museum of Texas mythology, massive oil paintings of Sam Houston and Stephen F. Austin, longhorn skulls mounted on polished wood, crystal chandeliers that had survived a suspicious fire decades ago. Every detail whispered power, legacy, and the particular brand of Texas exceptionalism that had kept men like Clayton Beauregard on the bench for generations. Governor Marcus Allen greeted her at the door with the warmth of a revivalist preacher. He was a tall man, silver-haired and telegenic, with a grip that lasted just a second too long and eyes that never stopped moving, cataloging every detail of her face, her dress, her demeanor. Judge Harding, he boomed, his voice carrying to the hovering staff and the inevitable invisible recorders. Welcome to my home. It is an honor. A genuine honor. Governor, she replied, her voice measured. Thank you for the invitation. This is my attorney, Vernon Sachs. Vernon extended a hand, his expression unreadable. Governor. Of course, of course. Vernon Sachs, the legal lion himself. I've read about your work. Impressive. Very impressive. Come in, both of you. Dinner is just us. Intimate. The way real conversations should happen. The dining room was smaller than Annalise had expected, dominated by a long mahogany table set for four. The fourth place setting was occupied by a woman who rose as they entered, striking, in her late 40s, with the polished armor of a career political operative. Judge Harding, may I present my chief counsel, Alexandra Vance. She'll be joining us. I hope you don't mind. Alexandra's smile was professional but not warm. Judge Harding. Mr. Sachs. I've followed your Hemlock County case with great interest. Remarkable outcome. Thank you, Annalise said, taking her seat. Though I prefer to think of it as a just outcome, not merely a remarkable one. Touché, Alexandra's eyes said. Aloud, she said, of course. The first course arrived, some kind of delicate seafood creation that Annalise barely tasted. The conversation circled like vultures, polite and predatory. The governor asked about her son, her time on the bench, her thoughts on judicial philosophy. Annalise answered with the precision of a witness under oath, giving nothing away. It was over the main course, perfectly cooked beef tenderloin, because everything in Texas was beef, that the governor finally showed his hand. Judge, let me be direct. The Supreme Court vacancy is real. Justice Morrison's health is declining, and he'll be stepping down by fall. I need a nominee who can be confirmed, who can bring credibility to the court, and who can help modernize our image without alienating our base. Modernize your image, Annalise repeated. The governor smiled, a little less warm now. Texas is changing. Demographics are shifting. The old guard, men like Clayton Beauregard, God rest their souls, they had their time. But the future requires something different. Someone different. You mean someone black? Someone female? Someone whose very presence on the court signals that Texas isn't what it used to be. Alexandra's fork paused midair. The governor's smile didn't waver, but his eyes sharpened. I mean someone qualified, he said. Which you are. Undeniably. But yes, the symbolism matters. You'd be a fool to pretend otherwise, and I don't think you're a fool. Vernon spoke for the first time. What's the catch? The governor laughed, a genuine sound that filled the room. I like you, Saxe. Straight to the point. The catch, as you put it, is this: the nomination would require certain assurances. Such as? Alexandra set down her fork. Such as a commitment to judicial restraint. A recognition that the role of the court is to interpret law, not create it. A willingness to work with the other justices collegially, without public grandstanding. And a promise that the Hemlock County settlement, your very public victory, would remain a closed chapter. No further lawsuits against Texas law enforcement. No public commentary on pending legislation regarding qualified immunity. No advocacy that could be perceived as hostile to the men and women in uniform who keep this state safe. The silence that followed was profound. Even the invisible staff seemed to hold their breath. Annalise looked at Alexandra, then at the governor. When she spoke, her voice was quiet but clear as a bell. You're not offering me a seat on the Supreme Court. You're offering me a muzzle. Governor Allen's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. I'm offering you a platform. A historic platform. You would be the first black woman to serve on the highest court in Texas. Your name would be in every history book. Your legacy would be secure. My legacy, Annalise said slowly, is not something I need a governor to secure for me. Alexandra leaned forward. Judge Harding, with respect, you've made enemies. Powerful ones. The settlement, the publicity, the way you've become a symbol, it's made you a target. On the court, you'd be protected. Untouchable. Off the court, you're just another judge with a target on her back. Vernon's jaw tightened. Is that a threat? It's reality, Alexandra said smoothly. We're offering a way forward. A way up. Annalise set down her napkin. She looked at the governor, at his carefully constructed smile and his calculating eyes. She thought of her grandmother's Pinto, of Sheriff Gable's cabin, of the notes sent to her son. She thought of every black motorist who had been pulled over, harassed, humiliated, and who would never see a penny of justice. Governor, she said, I appreciate the dinner. The food was excellent. But I'm going to decline your offer. The governor's smile finally cracked, just slightly. Judge, I hope you'll take some time to consider. This isn't a decision to make lightly. I've considered it, Annalise said, rising. Fully. The answer is no. Vernon was on his feet beside her, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes blazing with something like pride. Alexandra stood as well, her face unreadable. Judge Harding, if you walk out that door, things will become more difficult. For you. For your son. For everyone connected to you. Annalise turned to face her fully. For a long moment, the two women simply looked at each other, the political operative and the judge, each understanding exactly what the other was capable of. Alexandra, Annalise said quietly, I've spent my entire career being told that things would become difficult if I didn't comply. I've been threatened by men with badges, men with gavels, and men with nothing to lose. I buried one of them already. I'm not afraid of the rest. She walked out without looking back. The drive back to the hotel was silent. Vernon didn't speak until they were safely in her suite with the doors locked and his phone swept for bugs, a habit he'd developed since Hemlock County. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen, he said finally, or the craziest. Probably both, Annalise said, echoing her own words from weeks ago. She poured herself a glass of water, her hands perfectly steady. They'll come for me now. Really come for me. Let them, Vernon said. We've got files. We've got evidence. We've got 35 million reasons to fight back. Annalise nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She was thinking about Marcus, safe at Stanford with Diane watching over him. She was thinking about her grandmother, who had taught her that the only thing more dangerous than a white man with a badge was a white man with a badge who'd been made to feel small. The governor didn't have a badge. But he had something worse. He had the entire state of Texas behind him. And Annalise Harding had just told him no. The game, she realized, was only beginning.